I've had times where I forgot how to do something and I've watched my own video to remember how it worked. So.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to CSS Masters Talk. My name is Amit Chin. With me is Elad Shechter, and today we're talking with someone who I am following for a very long time and learned a lot from, Kevin Powell. Hi, Kevin. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So for those of you who don't know who Kevin is a designer, developer, teacher, and has an amazing, really active and popular YouTube channel about CSS and design and everything else that is front-end related. Kevin, did I forget anything?
No, sounds good.
No. So Elad, do you have anything to add?
No. If Kevin don't know me, I have a big community in Israel that called CSS Master Israel with more than 5,500 members. We have meetups. It's a really big group in Israel. And besides this, I would love to talk in meetups and conferences about CSS. Maybe you saw some of my things in the internet. More articles in English than talks, but I have some talks in the last years. And I'm really happy to see you here with us. It's a big pleasure for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great. So Kevin, let's get to know you a little bit. When I introduced you, I said you are a designer, developer, teacher, because I know you do all three. But can you rank them, like, if you had to choose one title, what would it be?
That's, I guess it's pushed more towards developer in recent years, but it is a bit of a hard one for me just because it's been a weird journey to get to where I am now.
I know you started as a designer.
Yeah, I started as a designer, and even that, I have a BA in urban planning, and like I've done all sorts of stuff. I have a degree in film, and that I never did anything with. So then I went back to school for design, and I've been making websites since high school in the late 90s and way back, but that was just a hobby. It was for fun. And then it was a bit of Photoshop. I'd slice things up, make some websites based on that. And then eventually it was on and off. I did it as a hobby, both design stuff and and websites and stuff like that. And then eventually went back to school after getting my BA in design. And so I trained in there and then got a job. I worked in design for about 6 years. And at the beginning it was all print. I only did print design. But then I was working full time and then started doing side gigs where I was just trying to find anything I could to get a bit of extra money and started doing a lot of web design stuff. So it was all just mock-ups, things like that. And it sort of rekindled my interest in making websites again. I also said, if I'm designing it and getting paid, I used to make websites. Let's see if I can get back into development. So I started making websites on the side as well, or trying to do the entire process as my freelancing thing. And the more I did that, the more I started transitioning towards web. And it was right around then I actually got hired as a teacher. So the school that I originally went to hired me, and they're primarily a design school, but then they found out I had web experience and they had a small little they have a few web classes. And they're like, okay, all of our teachers only know print. You're getting all the web stuff. So that's how I got into teaching the web. So I am definitely more on the development side, but I think it's very heavy on development / teacher at this point. The design stuff has sort of fallen behind now.
But what made you focus on CSS and not JavaScript, for example?
I think it's because of the design background. I don't remember where I read it. I wish I could. There was a book I read. I think it was from one of the books on A List Apart, but I don't remember. But it was really nicely put on, like, CSS is the language of designers. For me, it really speaks well to just like, it's being able to put my designs together or other people's designs or whatever it is. It really, it attracted me early on. I guess it's also like back, especially when I started, it was HTML and CSS, and well, it was just HTML when I first started. But just, it was that natural progression that everybody would take early on, was you'd learn HTML, then you'd learn CSS, then you'd learn JavaScript. Whereas these days it's a little bit different. A lot of people get into the JavaScript, React, and all of that, and then fall backwards into the other ones. So I sort of whenever I kept going back, CSS, well, HTML and CSS were the parts that I already knew and I was comfortable with, but I had to refresh myself, and it would always be updated, and there's lots of new stuff going on. So I'd sort of refresh myself. So the more I would get into it, the more I don't know, I just sort of funneled more and more into CSS, and I really enjoy it. It's like building a puzzle for me. So.
Do you see it as a positive thing? You mentioned that today's new developers go straight into React and Angular and JavaScript and don't learn the basics. Do you think it's a positive thing because they can do more things more quickly, or do you think there's a problem with it?
I do think there is a bit of a problem with it. I think part of the problem is just from not understanding even HTML properly. The CSS thing can be frustrating when I've been brought into a React project, and I I didn't even know where to start. But then when everything, the CSS, you can fix it. Like you can strip things down and fix it. When the structure of things isn't well done, it can be a big issue. There's accessibility issues. There's a lot more there. So I think the bigger thing, and I think both of them get overlooked too from if you're coming from computer science or if you're coming from just learning JavaScript. Both HTML and CSS seem really simple because the syntax is so simple. And so I think they get overlooked in their complexity. And especially, I mean, HTML is not complex. It's just, you do need to sort of understand the semantics of it. But CSS definitely, I think, gets overlooked because it looks so simple at the beginning. And then people get frustrated with it because it seems counterintuitive. It's not working the way it should, but it's just because they overlooked it and think it should be easy, but there's a lot more going on behind it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it looks more simple than it actually is once you go deep into the guts of the CSS. Let's talk a bit about your YouTube channel. I should mention your YouTube channel is active since 2016. It has over 250 videos and over 140,000 subscribers. Can you tell us how it all began?
Yeah, so that I got first, I actually almost started my channel on WordPress development instead of CSS specifically, or because when I first started doing a lot of freelance stuff, I was doing WordPress content. I design it, then I make a lot of child themes and stuff. So I was originally going to go that way, and I'm really happy I haven't touched WordPress in probably, yeah, it's probably been about 5 years. I haven't even been in there now. But originally what had happened is when I'd started teaching at school, I knew the stuff, but I didn't, it's one thing to, especially then they were still teaching floats and stuff like that. And it was one thing to know how it works. I could build a layout with it, but then to try and explain it is really different from being able to use it and do that. So I was looking for a lot of resources online on just seeing how other people would explain things. And so one channel that I ended up watching a lot of was Dev Tips with Travis Nielsen. Was a huge fan of his channel and his work. I really loved it. Really, that was appointment viewing for me. I sort of fell in love with his channel. And then when he stopped, it left a little bit of a void, I guess. And that was a combination of what I was teaching in school was really the early on stuff. I was doing intro to HTML and CSS. We did a second course that was a little bit more responsiveness, and it went a little bit deeper, but it was always over and over and over again, pretty much the beginner stuff. And I love teaching it. I think it's really helped me be able to teach online as well by teaching in the classroom. But at one point, I did that for 2 years, and it was sort of like, okay, I want to not forget what I know and also keep learning and pushing and diving into CSS. And since Travis had stopped his channel, there was nothing really equivalent. So I just decided, why not make my own content instead?
Great.
So that's sort of.
I think I wrote it to you in the email. Every time a young developer asks me how to improve his CSS skills and how to learn new things, the first thing I do is to direct him to your channel. And I want to know, what is your go-to advice for young developers that are getting started with CSS?
Yeah, the first thing is don't take it for granted. As we said, it's a lot more complicated than it looks at the beginning. When you start, it's color blue and it changes color, so you think it's easy. But as soon as things start getting a little bit more complicated, even on how Flexbox works, it's how does Flexbox work? It's crazy. There's so much going on under the hood, and there's so much the browser's doing to make it work. And I don't think you need to figure out exactly how the browser is rendering things, but I do think it's important to understand a little bit of the sort of the behind the scenes stuff that's happening. And it's, especially early on, you learn like the box model, the basics of the cascade, you learn things like that. And then you sort of never talk about it again or think about it. It's maybe learning things like that at a deeper level, actually finding out things, there's things like the content flow, formatting contexts that nobody talks about. There's stacking context that nobody really talks about. For me, I spend lots of time on the MDN, if I'm researching stuff, trying to find out something new. And I guess the other thing, and one thing that a lot of people tell me, you see it all the time, and it's not just CSS related, it's everything with development. People get stuck in tutorial hell. They can watch tutorials, they can understand exactly what's going on. It looks easy, everything's fine. And then they go to start a project and they're looking at a blank file and they don't know what to do. Super common.
Yeah.
And so I think the best thing is that one of the advantages of being a teacher is going to university for a while in education. So there's the different levels of learning. And the first one is understanding, which means that you can see somebody do it and you can understand. This is like seeing someone ride a bike. You can watch somebody ride a bike. They can tell you the steps. You could probably even explain those steps. But that doesn't mean you know how to ride a bike yet. You haven't tried, you haven't got on, you hadn't got the balance. It's the same thing with writing code. You can watch somebody else do it and it makes sense, it's easy, and then you go to do it and you don't know where to go. So it's, if you're watching videos, even if it's easy, even if you understand, code along with the video. The video's finished, try doing something else with it. Practice the exact same thing again, but maybe not exactly the same, try and do other things with it. But it's like any other skill, you can't just watch. You actually have to be constantly writing code yourself. I think that's the biggest thing, and the biggest reason people get stuck is because they don't write enough. They just consume content instead of actively making stuff.
Great advice. The reason I follow you for so long is because I really like the type of content that you talk about and the way that you talk about that content. I want to know, how do you decide what to talk about and specifically how deep to dive into each subject?
That's a good question. How I decide, a lot of it's just what interests me. One of the reasons my focus is so much on CSS. Early on, I was doing, I'm trying to think actually in a way. Yeah, as I've gone, I just have like, now it's on Notion. I used to use Trello a lot, and I just had like an idea list. So it was just anytime I'd have any idea whatsoever, I'd add it to that list. And then when I need an idea, I'd look and I just pick from there what sounded the most interesting. A lot of what I did early on, especially since I had been teaching in the classroom, was to base it on where I saw my own students struggling. So if I saw things that people had trouble with, so my very first video was how to make a nav bar, just because making a navigation beginners, it's something they struggled with. So I thought that would be a good video. And then part of it is also, as by having the channel, I've had to dive deeper into CSS. So as I was learning stuff, the best way, the other thing is practice, practice, practice. If you're learning things, it's also to actually teach it. When you teach things, you learn it at a deeper level than you could ever imagine. And so if I'd done something, used it enough, then if I thought it would be good for a video, I'd usually teach something around it.
So you use videos like an excuse to learn something new.
Definitely, yeah.
Great. And you talk about your older videos. When you look at your older videos, do you look at your older videos, by the way?
I've even looked up, I've had times where I forgot how to do something and I've watched my own video to remember how it worked. So.
Do you ever think like, oh, I should have done this differently? I'm not talking about the video, I'm talking about the code. Like, do you think like, oh, now I would have done this differently?
Yeah, definitely. Some of my early ones, well, even my nav bar, that first video that I did was with floats. So obviously I would want to redo that. Or actually I did redo that one in a more up-to-date one, but that's still one of my most popular videos. And I'm sort of like, oh, I wish people would watch one of these other ones instead. And even some of those early ones, I think I've changed a lot as a developer since I started my channel. My class naming is much better. I think my semantic HTML understanding is much deeper now. So some of the stuff in the early ones I think could be better, but luckily for the most part, the older videos don't get as much traction. There's a few of them that definitely lead people into my channel. And like that nav bar, there's another one on background images, which that one I think is a pretty good video anyway. But on the older content, I think if it brings people in and then they start watching my newer stuff, then it's like, it's why I don't think I should take that down, because I think it's still a good gateway and entry into, you know, it's not that I did anything wrong. It's just that you could probably do it with newer technology in a better way these days. That's probably the biggest downside.
But have you ever removed a video that was irrelevant because things have changed?
No, not yet. I don't think, actually there's one series that I probably could take down. I say that, the main reason I'd say that is it's one of my first ones where I built like a full layout, and again, it was float based. But at the same time, as much as I think people shouldn't focus on floats, if you're learning now, like it's, you know, if you're building a new layout, you should be using Flexbox, hopefully, maybe Grid. If you're working at a company, realistically, you probably have legacy sites. You probably still need to know how float based layouts work. I think it's a reality that people are going to be dealing with for a long time. So I guess it is a question of, is it still a good learning tool because people still need to know it, even if it's sort of more legacy, or should I take it down? I haven't taken it down yet. And I haven't had any videos where I've made a big enough mistake in it. Usually, if ever, yeah, not yet. And I have had a few that didn't get published because as I'm editing it, I go, whoop, nope. So at that stage, I usually catch it. And it's one of the reasons I do like editing. Or even it might be a smaller mistake and I can put a little caption up or some writing on. But I usually catch any glaring errors at the editing stage, if not earlier.
Okay. Elad, questions? Yeah.
I don't think you need to drop out the float, because this is something that you built and is built you in the way. And I think when people watch it, they need to look when it's published, and then as a web developers, we don't just look and tell this is the truth, this is the whole truth. We look and we need to understand where it came from, because that if I was having a really successful post about float that people still looking on it, I will just put it there and put my new articles in the down.
In the links below.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the new stuff.
So Kevin, let's talk a bit about your courses. But first of all, you work, as you said, you work at college as teaching web development, and also have online courses about HTML, CSS, responsive design. But before we talk about the specific courses, can you talk a bit about the differences between teaching in college and building an online course?
Yeah, for sure. Teaching in person, I think the fact that I did that first was a huge benefit. Just because during that, you know, especially the way our classes work is I'm in front of the same group for say 3 weeks straight for 6 hours a day. And I do my live sessions, live demos, they watch, they ask questions, and then I'm walking around the room as they're working and I can answer their questions as they're doing stuff. I interrupt to do another demo. So the nice thing with that is I now, like, when I'm doing online stuff, I can already sort of anticipate people's questions. Just because I've seen so many of them. I've seen so many mistakes that people make. Like the best thing with teaching, if ever you teach people, whether online, if it's like personal coaching more, or if it's in person, the absolute best thing is you become amazing at debugging. It's because the mistakes people make, you wouldn't believe. And so you quickly learn how to debug really well. But I'd say the biggest difference is I know when I'm doing it in person, I can adjust the speed. I know when, like, sometimes I have to do the same demo 3 times, but in a different way. Cause you know, I see live if it's not clicking or if the students aren't getting it. Whereas if it's going to be online, you don't want the same lesson 3 times. People are going to get mad at you. You know, they can pause, they can rewind. But you obviously have to make it as clear as possible the first time around, because they're just going to stop watching if not. So I do think it's harder to teach in person in one way, but I think you need to be more organized to teach online, like online classes or online learning, just because obviously after the fact you can add a new video or you can do other things to make corrections and all of that. But I think that it's easy, like I can adjust if I have a bad day, or I have a day where I had a lot of questions, or I see the project's not going great in person, I can come up with a new lesson, or I can come up with new things that night, and then the next day go back over it. We can revisit concepts. Whereas when it's an online course, you don't have that option. You have to trust that if the person's not understanding, they might go back. But I know people learning online, that's really hard to do. So yeah, I do think it's harder to teach a full course online to keep people engaged too. In the class, they have to show up. They're there for the grades. They're paying to be there. People pay for courses too, but it's really hard to keep people engaged and going through an entire course, even ones, I don't know what the numbers are exactly, but I know that the completion rate of online courses, even paid ones, is really low. And for me, I think if people have paid for a course or even are doing a free one, I want to do as much as I can to keep them engaged throughout the whole thing. And so it's coming up with different strategies. One of the things that I've tried to incorporate myself is just as many challenges as possible. So not just here, let's watch me build this and follow along with me, and I can explain everything I'm doing. But when I'm doing it in the classroom, I do that, and then I stop and I make them code and make them do stuff. And I want them to pull ahead. I want them, here's the project we're working on. I'll do this first section, and then you can do the next 3 sections and I'll help you out if you have problems. Now it's different online, but I want that same type of idea and dynamic where it's like, here, let's learn the skills we need. Now here's stuff for you to try to do on your own to make sure you've actually understood it. And trying to do that, I think it's more difficult to actually get them to do it, but I think it's an important thing. And yeah, giving challenges, doing different things online to actually get people coding instead of just binge watching your whole course.
Okay. By the way, if I remember correctly, you actually had more courses online that are not available at the moment.
Yes.
And you recently started working with Scrimba. Can you tell us a bit about Scrimba and about the courses that you moved?
Yeah, I'll start with the one that I took off. So it was a SAS course, and it's going to come back out eventually. But SAS
Scrimba
updated.
Or
sorry, no, this one would be on my own platform eventually. So I'd made that one. I don't even remember when it came out. It ended up. I didn't mean for it to be such a big course, but it turned into a really big undertaking and was really hard because I had my full-time job and YouTube, and I was working on that. It was the first course I did online. I think it turned out really good, but I had trouble finishing the last project. So I said, I'm going to take it down I'm going to close the doors until I can finish the last big piece of it. And then I'm going to re-release it. And while it was closed, SAS went and updated itself. And they, now they have the U's and all of that instead of imports. And so I need to sort of I have to work on the course again before I re-release it. And I haven't had a chance to do that yet. So I plan on releasing it again, but it hasn't come out yet. As far as the Scrimba course, that has been a very, very positive experience for me. Per, who's one of the founders of Scrimba, reached out to me, and they were looking at the time, it was all free content that they had, and they were looking at making some paid courses. So I was the first one. And what we did is I made a 4-hour free course for them just to get used to the platform, make sure I really understood it. And for anyone who's not familiar with Scrimba, it is a really awesome platform in that you're watching the video, but then you're seeing the code. You can pause the video, and in the video player, you can write your own code and see how it updates, and then hit play again and follow along with the teacher again. So it's from a coding perspective, it's really exciting and really, really cool. So we did the free course, and then I made my responsive web design bootcamp. So that's a 15-hour course, which ended up being quite big itself. That was a lot of fun, and I've had a lot of positive feedback from that one. So that was a good experience. And Scrimba seems to be doing some pretty big things now. They've just switched over to a subscription-based model because they have a bunch of courses. They've made a career path now, so they're up to some big stuff.
Yeah. By the way, you said something that it's related to the last question I asked you. For me, one difference that I see between online courses and colleges and universities is that online courses have to teach the cutting edge of technology, what is relevant right now, while in colleges you normally learn something that is relevant to like 2 years ago. Where I teach, for example, they're only going to start teach grid next year, sadly. Yeah, so this is just one thing I wanted to add. But are you planning to add more courses in the future other than SAS?
Yeah, so I'm working on another one right now called CSS Demystified that's going to be a little bit about what I was talking about earlier on when I said what people should learn if they're struggling with CSS. It's going into sort of, it's for people that have started using CSS, they're somewhat comfortable with it, but it just seems like it doesn't click for them. So it's going to be about learning about going back over a lot of the concepts that you're taught early on, but not really deep enough. So diving back into the cascade and really making sure the order of importance, there's some weird things there that people they don't really grasp 100%. Going into formatting context, the difference between the regular flow, when it's a flex or grid context, things like that. So it'll be, I think, a shorter course. I'm not going to be making it a giant one. So I'm slowly working on that now. I'm hoping to have it out end of August. I actually wanted to have it out about 3 months ago, but it's been really slow going. So I'm doing that. I'm also working on adding some new stuff over at Scrimba as well. I plan on continuing to work with them because it's been, I think the platform is really awesome. And so I do plan on continuing to work with those guys. I'm going to add a bit to the course I've already done to go into custom properties and do some fun stuff with that. And then eventually I do want to get back around. Once the Demystified course is out, I'll start working back on the SAS course again.
Okay, great. We're looking forward for it. So let's talk a bit about CSS in general. One question I love to ask everybody is, what selector or property do you miss the most in CSS? Like what property is not available in CSS, but you wish it would be, or what selector will make your life easier?
Definitely a parent selector.
Has, yeah, that's the common answer for everybody, yeah.
Yeah.
I think me and Elad are getting asked at least once a week how to control a parent element. Yeah. Elad, you want to ask something?
What you are enjoying the most in creating content in general?
In general, I think I enjoy the whole process, really. I like teaching in general. I teach full time and on the side, so obviously I must enjoy it. I like the interaction I get with other people, the conversations, especially now. Like early on, it was really a hobby. My channel obviously now is really succeeding, but early on, like the first 6 months, I think I had like 100 subscribers. There was nobody watching. I was doing it it was a hobby for me. And the first even 2 years, like my viewership was really low, and it was just fun to make content, to push yourself, to come up. I think part of it is also like I love learning new stuff. My wife's always complaining because I always seem to have something new to learn. Right now I'm learning magic. I was learning, I started making bread. I started to make my own beer. Like it's all these new things that I always want to learn. I always pick up something new. I have to be learning something. So I see content creation as an excuse to always be learning stuff, because I don't want to be revisiting the same material all the time. And so there's that. And I do like helping people and getting, anytime somebody says that any of my videos or tutorials or anything like that has helped them, for me, that's really gratifying that I've been able to sort of push somebody in the right direction for something. I think that's, it's a nice feeling, obviously, when people enjoy your content, but it's more than just like, I don't want people just always saying thank you, but it's also, there's a lot of discussions I've had, especially with other YouTube web developers and stuff, where we're sort of pushing each other and growing. And I do think that it's a really good way to grow as well. And yeah, I think it's gratifying for all of that.
I want to ask about CSS animations. Anyone who knows me knows I love CSS animations. If you saw my copy, you know it. And I haven't seen too much animations on your channel.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
I'm not good with that. It's not something I'm the strongest with, would be the main reason. It's definitely something I like, but it's something that, it's the same reason I get a lot of people asking me to do more JavaScript content. I can write JavaScript. I'm comfortable with JavaScript, but it's not like, I'm not here with JavaScript. So it's a little bit the same thing. I don't want to teach something unless I'm really comfortable with it. I'm always afraid that I'll give bad advice or, something along the way. If I'm going to teach it, I want to make sure that I'm really, really comfortable and strong, and I've done my research, and I know, it has to be something I'm already comfortable with. Then I research it more, then I'm going to teach it. So for that, it's something that I love, like, when I was on your CodePen for a little bit after you shared the link, just because there are some really cool things in there.
Thank you.
I was really enjoying that. And anytime you see these amazing things sometimes on CodePen, or to be on a newsletter or something you click through, and it's just, and you look at it and it doesn't always have to be that complicated. But it's just, I guess it's not something that I've had, I'm trying to think of the opportunity to use enough through like all the production have done. It's just not something that really has come up in a big way. So I haven't had the chance to dive in. I think now I'm hoping, well, I'm busy with the courses, but eventually there are a few things that I want to sort of dive deeper into. And I think that could be a really fun one to eventually try and crack.
I can tell you from experience, it is fun. One question is that during your time as a CSS developer, things has changed a lot. Like technology is evolving really fast these days, specifically CSS. CSS is very different than what it was 3 or 4 years ago. And I wonder, what is the biggest game changer in your opinion?
Definitely for me, it's been Grid. As soon as I heard about Grid, I started diving in. I think it actually, one of the reasons I think my channel actually had a bump at a certain time, because as I said, it started slow, but I was one of the first YouTubers to get in and dive into Grid a little bit. And now looking back, I need to go back in. I haven't done any videos on it in so long now. And the content I did on it was, it's not, I don't have like a proper Grid. Like I touch on different things, but like, I'm like, I never really did like a proper series on Grid, which I really should do. And I think I love it so much just because, yeah, I think I love it so much because of my design background, and just how like very familiar coming from there. Maybe it's because when I started, it was all table-based layouts. So it's a little bit familiar in a sense, without the horror of table-based layouts. But now even I've been playing around a lot with SubGrid, and I'm really hoping that the other browsers get on that fast, because
SubGrid is not yet implemented enough for a production.
No, it's only in Firefox right now. And so as soon as it hit Firefox, I started playing with it, and it's as much as I love Grid, on a large scale, I've run into some issues with it. I had a really nice layout. I thought it'd be perfect for it. But it really involved like nested grids almost. And I got it to work, but it was a nightmare. And I'm like, I should have approached it another way, but I was so stuck on that idea. And if SubGrid was there, it's literally, it fixes any issue that I had with Grid, it fixes it. And it's so disappointing that nobody else has picked it up yet. And I don't even see it behind any flags or anything yet in Chrome. So I'm hoping, Grid was adopted so quickly, and now you're just sitting there looking at only Firefox with SubGrid. And I'm like, come on, guys, do it. You did it with Grid. Let's go. Come on. Because I do think that's what's going to take it to the next level and make it easier for people to adopt. Because there's definitely, I know a lot of people say they struggle with Grid. And there's definitely this weird thing with it for certain elements and certain ways that it works, because it's such a macro layout tool. But SubGrid sort of helps the whole thing come together. So I'm really looking forward to once that eventually does hit.
Okay. And looking ahead, where do you see CSS is going to? How do you see CSS 3 or 4 years from now?
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I don't know exactly where it's going, but there's a lot of interesting things that I think are in the pipeline. It was on one of the Shop Talk shows. They had Jen Simmons on, who was talking about a few of the proposals. I think there is something in the works for component queries.
Yeah.
So that's going to be really exciting. I think there's a few different specs that are being looked at, or possibilities being looked at. So it's probably a ways off still. But that'd be really cool when it hits. And I just think I said Grid was the biggest thing for me. I think custom properties is the one I actually use the most. That's relatively new. It's been around for a while now. But it for me is such, I have a Sass course, and I don't, even when I write Sass now, everything, I just use custom properties. I don't use Sass variables except in places where you have to for some loops and stuff. But I think that's been a huge game changer. I haven't really been listening out too much on where things are going, other than the component queries thing. But I'm always excited to see. I know that there's been some talk of, it always seems that they're looking at the most popular features also from the post processors or preprocessors like Sass and less. So there's anytime I'm a big fan of Sass. So anytime something can come to native CSS, it always makes it better. The same way variables turn into custom properties are better than variables. So, if there's descendant selectors, sort of like the ampersand or something like that, I'm sure that it would become more useful somehow once it goes to native CSS. The one thing I always do worry about though, whenever the new technologies enable us to do more stuff, which is awesome. Like a component query would be so fantastic. Or a parent selector, if it's ever possible, could be really cool. But it's also like when I started, it was so simple. And I think that opened the door to more people because you jump in and you could do it. Whereas now web development, and it's not only CSS, it's just web development in general, the technology's advanced so much, but it's so much more complicated. I definitely get a lot of people reaching out to me just saying like, I don't know where to go next. It looks overwhelming. There's so many things to learn. And, it's like, slow down, you're going to get there one thing at a time. Don't try and learn it all. But it was just like the barrier of entry was so low before. And I think, people would get in editing their MySpace pages and stuff like that. And it was really cool. We have less like that now. And I do think it's a little bit harder to get started than it used to be, which is a shame, but it's a trade-off. The extra technology makes so many more things possible that it's always a good thing.
Yeah, great. But it actually leads me to the next questions. From your point of view, what do you think is the position of a CSS developer? Like, is there a place for a CSS developer, or will CSS forever be just a tool for front-end developers?
Oh, that's a good question. I've been brought into projects because they were having trouble with their CSS and getting things the way they wanted it to, and so I've sort of positioned myself as a CSS expert to a certain extent. I don't like calling myself that, but thanks. So I do think that there is that it can exist, but I do think that of the languages, it's very underappreciated. I think JavaScript will, for the time being anyway, is at the top, and whatever framework is the hottest will stay at the top for a while, just because that's the functionality. It's what anyway, it's where it is. And again, I do think that a large part of that is just the simple syntax of CSS devalues it because it looks simple. So I do think that really does devalue it to a certain extent, which I hate saying. I do think that a lot of not hiring people necessarily, but a lot of other developers realize that CSS is hard and realize that they probably should be bringing on CSS people, but that doesn't reach the people that it needs to necessarily for hiring all the time. The positions do exist. I do think in the right companies that they do prioritize, or they not prioritize, but they do realize that that's its own thing. And they realize, the whole full stack developer, is question mark, can you be a full stack developer and everything and be efficient at it? I do think some places are seeing now it's more, okay, let's hire people based on their expertise. And I'm hoping the more time passes, and maybe that could be one of the benefits of these new technologies coming to CSS, is it slowly becomes something that's taken a bit more seriously. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you'd think it's actually would be the most important, because that's what people see. If you're building a website that, an e-commerce site or a product site, and you need people to go to your site and buy something, if it doesn't look good, that's a big part of it. And it's not even necessarily looking good, but it's, the functionality can be there, but if the CSS on top of that's busted, things aren't going to work properly anyway. It can add, I've seen some really negative user experiences. The design looked good enough. They sort of followed the mock-ups, but there's this disconnect between the two that can, probably costs companies lots of money that they don't realize.
I totally agree. And I will add something because this is something that is very close to my heart. I'm a 15 years web developer, and in the last 10 years, I'm just doing CSS, HTML, SAS, of course, and everything. And I'm called to myself a CSS architect, and I'm working in a big company that need the power of CSS. And I always think that I need to fight for everyone to know that this position need to be exist. And if you don't know, I wrote an article, why the world needs CSS web developers, and you can find it after. And
Sure.
it's really think that everyone that is thinking this idea need to write his own article from his own perspective view. If you want, you can write another one, and the world maybe will be a better one for people like us. Me and Amit are loving CSS. I'm don't want to do JavaScript. I know JavaScript, but I'm not good at it, and I want only to do the fun stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely more fun. But again, looking at the future of CSS as a profession, how do you see it now, especially now with the introduction of AI to front-end development?
It's a good. I think people have been thinking that you know, the what you see, what you get type of things and all of that are going to take over since I started, which was in the late 90s. So we haven't got there yet. For me, the best tool that I've used in I see there's, I haven't seen any AI I've seen some for a while, even when I was back in the early 2000s, I guess. I remember reading about this AI that was going to build websites that just kept seeing ads for it, and then I never heard of it again. Obviously,
we are seeing it more and more lately, like demos mainly, but we are seeing companies that work on AI that you just sit and speak to the computer and tell him what you want, and he builds his own website. So do you think it's going to affect CSS developers as a profession?
Only as much as it affects, I think, all developers in a sense. And right now, I think it's the same answer that I've had to people that were worried about things like Wix or like these website builders and anything like that. Maybe that's going to cut out part of it. I think AI in any industry, you sort of have to be a little bit worried about. I do think there's a big human element to what we do. As much as, I'll go back to what I was saying and then come back that with a lot of the website builders, the visual builders that people were really worried about, I think what it did is it opened the doors to people that didn't have websites before because it was low cost, easy to do, and very limited. So it brought people into websites that just wouldn't have had one otherwise. It might have taken a little bit of the market away from people that were actually hiring developers. Now you have things like Webflow that it changes the game a little bit. But even that, I think it works so well because you're pretty much just writing CSS, you're writing your own selectors and then you're just visually writing CSS. It's you almost need to be a CSS developer for that to really understand what's going on. And then, there's always a blurry zone about where it cuts off and stuff. But I do think that the biggest asset we have as any sort of developer is really you're a problem solver. And that as much, and I guess the AI is being put together as a problem solver, but I think that the skills you have as a developer, whatever it is, even, you're talking about CSS, which I do think in a very big way is problem solving. It's the same thing if you're writing, you're focused on HTML and accessibility, if you're a JavaScript developer, whatever it is. I think that in any of those, a large part of it is problem solving. And I think those skills are something that, at least for the time being, I'm not really worried about. I think overall, we're in one of the safer environments when it comes to the job market. Maybe I'm completely off base on this, and you never know. Who knows where we're going? But I saw a few people that were when I was in school for teaching. There was people there that were truck drivers that were becoming teachers for truck driving, and I was just like, I wonder how long they're going to have jobs for. Because it's one of those things that I guess everybody's a little bit worried about and concerned about. I could see it becoming a tool that helps, maybe even in a way. I'm not really sure. I guess I'd have to see. I haven't seen anything yet that's been like, oh, my job, like this isn't going to exist in 5 years. I don't think we're there yet with anything really. And long term, even I could see it becoming something, but I don't see it taking over the market and just I don't think it's all of a sudden everything is gone. I think it might get a niche and take that niche of that's the one thing it's good at, and then everything else, won't even really notice that it's going on. That's at least how I see it.
Great. I hope you're right. Elad, do you have any final questions?
No, it was very pleasure to meet you, Kevin.
Yeah, so Kevin, I too want to thank you for joining us today. We had a pleasure talking to you. Do you have any final words to our audience?
I just thank you so much for having me on. It's been fun to talk. Anytime I have a chance to talk any sort of CSS or web development, it's always a lot of fun. So I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on here and chat a little bit.
Great. So thank you all for watching. We'll be here next time, still talking about CSS, but with a different person. Bye-bye.
Bye, Kevin.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you so
Kevin.
much.
Bye.
Bye.